on to another episode of the AgView Pitch. Today you have Shay with Paul Bergschneider. And Paul, we're going to have a conversation today around what is the importance of having a CFO as part of your farming operation, or maybe a better way to say it is, does your farm need a part-time CFO? So first of all, thanks for taking the time to hop on today. And I wondered if you could just maybe give me a little bit of a background and tell the listeners about, who you are and where you're located.
Yeah, no, thanks, Shay. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today. My name's Paul Bergschneider. I'm actually near Springfield, Illinois, is where I'm based at. Grew up on the family farm here, corn, soybeans, cattle. We used to have hogs, but don't anymore, kind of like a typical farm. Did that, went to University of Illinois in Champaign, got my degree there, came back and kind of had in about 5 or 6 years and kind of were the basis of my what I do kind of started. I kind of jumped jobs pretty quick. I worked in input retailing for about 6 months. And I always tell people, one of the things I kind of looked at things differently was, I'd go out to sell fertilizer to somebody and it was like, well, how much fertilizer do you need? Well, there's the agronomic side, and there's also the business side of what actually can you afford. And in the sales position of retail, that wasn't necessarily my part, but I'm like, I really enjoyed that more. So I ended up shifting gears after that. I actually was a loan officer for the Farm Development Authority, which is, in essence, at that time, it was like the Illinois version of FSA guaranteed loans.
Hmm.
So I did that for about 5 years, doing mostly high risk and kind of a lot of livestock loans here in Illinois, where the state would come in and guarantee them. Then I spent about 10 years in an accounting firm after that. So did some taxes, financial statements, those sorts of things with farmers. And then there's a transition. The guy I'd worked for retired, and I ended up just basically going out on my own. So about the last 10 years or so, I basically kind of had a part-time CFO financial consulting business. I still farm. My dad and I farm, and I've got a couple kids. One kid's kind of back from college this year. So based on the family farm, kind of doing the financial stuff on the side is kind of where we're at. So,
Yeah, that's great. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the high risk loan, that 4 or 5 years that you were doing that. I can imagine there was probably a lot of interesting lessons learned, and I think we're at a interesting volatile time here in 2025 based on, the last couple of years. Any key insight that you pulled from those few years that you were doing that you think is relevant to today?
yeah, that was an interesting time because I started, and people remember back at them, and I might get my years confused, 96, 97, when hogs went to 8 cents one winter. I basically started about 6 months later. They had obviously an influx of needing extra loan help
Yeah.
when you go through something like that. And yeah, the story I always tell people I saw was because that was the deal that was, the hog business. And again, everybody's got to go back. This is 20 years ago before everything was contract. So you had people with fair to finish. A lot of guys had set up their business and basically almost like Monday you would sell pigs, every Monday, and every Wednesday you would buy feed and you pay the help on Friday, and like the cash flow just came in. I mean, you didn't hardly need an operating loan. It just kind of week to week everything cash flowed. And what you saw in that was, you see people that you look at their balance sheet and you're like, wow, how did they have so much trouble at one point in time? Well, it was back to working capital and cash, and that they basically didn't keep enough of it for that, once in a blue moon emergency.
Hmm.
And I saw things like you would see, because we were doing basically through the state level, see a lot of different loans, but you see somebody, one county to the next, everything's very similar. I saw a couple of times where people like were in a hurry to pay down their fixed loans. So they would like, oh, I want to hurry up and get this hog building or their combine and their other operation. I want to get my fixed loans paid down as fast as possible to get rid of those so I don't have that debt, but they still would keep their operating loans. Then you see other people who kept all their fixed loans and really didn't have much of an operating loan. And when things got really bad in those weeks where pigs were selling for 8 cents, the guys who kept all their fixed loan and had no operating loan had a lot more options because they still had an operating loan. You could go into the bank at the teller and they would still give you money because your operating loan wasn't maxed out, where the other guy went in and, even if he had prepaid on all his fixed loans, you could have got the mortgage or the note out and said, look, I'm $200,000 ahead. And like, we don't care. Pigs are
Yeah.
8 cents. The world is falling. Everything is going to end. So we can't help you out. Well, if you look at the bank's books, both guys have been in similar situations, but one guy manage it differently. So my take home lesson was that is you have to keep enough working capital or a way to access it no matter what, because yeah, you just never know. So
So you think that situation still applies today as farmers listening to this are looking at maybe even some of the longer term loans being termed out because of the financial situation that we're in. A lot of hard conversations I know going on here the last 2 months and definitely in the next 2 months for a lot of farm operations. Do you think that still applies on how do you prioritize where you're paying down some of that debt?
yeah, I think so. Some of that's in the good times too. I mean, I think a lesson to be learned is, 2 or 3 years ago or even a year ago, it's like, I think, oh, I might be able to pay a loan off early. Don't. If you think something's coming, you're
Yeah.
better off to wait and make sure you can. But now I think the other side of that is if you're having, some financial trouble and you paid some loans off early, to go back and restructure those loans and basically put them back on the books in the fixed loan side is not a bad thing. I mean, you're just basically fixing what you did and put that working capital back in. Or if you had something set up where, oh, we bought a farm a couple of years ago and we set it up on, well, we thought we could pay it off in 10 years. It's like, well, you're not going to pay a farm off in 10 years on the farm. You're paying it off with other earnings. And if those other earnings aren't there, then there's nothing wrong with, okay, we got to restructure it and put it back to 25 or 30 or whatever it is. So,
Yeah. No,
yeah,
that's
no, I think that's a piece of it to remember that just if you have to restructuring your debt, nobody wants to do it, but it's not the end of the world. It's just, especially if you go back and dig into, well, what do we do? Or, I often do with guys is go back and figure out how much equipment you bought in the last 2 or 3 years and wrote a check for it and then look at your working capital and then say, wow, if I had borrowed all that money, this is how much working capital I'd have. You'll probably feel a lot better about yourself. You'll be able to explain stuff to your banker a little bit better. And then, you can go in now and do a machinery loan on all that stuff that you already bought for 6 or 7 years and kind of bring some working capital back. So yeah, there's a lot of options. It's something you gotta, like I said, you gotta take the time to look at it and dig through it and kind of figure out where you need to be.
I appreciate your insight on that. I think that'll resonate with this crowd, especially as they kind of look at uh, renewing operating loans and then thinking about, what debt they're going to take on because you equipment still needs replaced. You still need to have a plan in place. You still need to move the operation forward. We're not going to be in an economic downturn forever. Decisions still need to be made. So I think that's a very pertinent outlook for 2025 as well. With and maybe with the work you're doing, I'll ask you a couple questions and I'm going to come back to, maybe how farmers should be thinking about those types of things on a more frequent basis. So whether that's monthly or quarterly, kind of planning out what their future purchasing looks like. But I think this might be a good time to tell listeners, you mentioned you about 10 years ago, started doing your own kind of, firm with what you're doing there at Bergschneider Ag. And maybe tell us a little bit about what you do, kind of what services you offer to farmers and why you feel that that's important.
Yeah. So, I mean, usually the easy way I describe it is like I'm kind of like a part-time CFO for people. And that's kind of all over the board. I mean, I have people that I maybe, help with projects once a year when they're trying to figure out their year-end financials to the bankers. And then, I have people where I'm doing monthly financial statements for them. A lot of it's just simply dependent on kind of the structure of your farm operation. What do you need and what do you need help with?
Mhm.
It's just to me, it's something that, I talk about the background I have, I've kind of been able to sit on both sides where I used to be a banker. I used to work in an accounting firm and I also farm. So I kind of see both sides of that. So, I can help somebody with, okay, we need to get our financial information kind of looking like this. So the bank's credit department doesn't have a email that has 14 lines on it with a whole bunch of questions, to kind of be set up. And then two, helping from an accountant side, get everything ready for taxes and stuff like that. So, I help people on things from just, I mean, some stuff is just helping bookkeeping. I don't really do much bookkeeping myself, but it's like, oh, we've got this weird transactions. How do we put it in the books? Well, call me and I'll help you through it, to helping them with, payroll taxes and then getting your information ready for your accountants at the end of the year and then stuff into, should we trade combines? How much can I afford to buy the farm that's coming up for auction next door? And then like we were talking about before, all that debt structuring stuff, okay, I'm trading this, should I get a loan on it? Should I pay cash? Should I lease? There's been times where leasing might make sense. So you go trade a machinery and the dealer gives you two options. Well, how do you analyze what these two options are with different payments and that sort of stuff? So that's just kind of plugging it into a spreadsheet and trying to figure it out. So,
Yeah.
and then I help people some, your estate planning and stuff like that. I mean, not an attorney, but kind of, one of the things I talk about too is, a lot of it's just as a family, you've got to decide what you want to do. So some of it's, as I know operations over time, you sit down with conversations and talk to them with that.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of different things. I mean, it kind of depends on the business and the farm. If somebody has a lot of different entities, one of the things we sometimes do is like consolidate all that stuff. So instead of having six different balance sheets, well, the bank usually wants to see all six, then they want to see the summary of what it is. So I help people do things like that as well.
If you had to put a number, I have a number in my head. How many farms do you think have a full-time CFO on staff?
Oh, uh, very, very few.
Maybe
Yeah.
less
And,
than
and, and I think most
2%?
farms are, what was that?
Maybe less than 2%?
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah.
Yep.
And why do you
Yep.
think that
Because,
is?
I mean, some of it's a size thing and
Yep.
just having a full-time person in the office, if you back into the amount of income it's going to take for that, I think that's a lot of it. Some of it too, I mean, it's the business side, I have a friend who always said, and I kind of found this true, farming, they always divided farming into three pieces. You have the agronomic, the machinery, and the business. Because, most people kind of like and are good at two of those three.
Yep.
Not everybody likes all three. And it's kind of like, you got to figure out where you might need help at with those, I told I enjoy the business side. I enjoy the agronomic side. If you've got to take an engine apart, something breaks when I'm in the field, yeah, I am not the guy. I just got to pick the phone up and have somebody come help me.
Right.
So, everybody has their passions and what gifts God has given them. And it's just, sometimes if you need some help on this or that, it's no different than you can't fix the combine because you got to plug the laptop in to get it to work and you got to call the dealer. It's like sometimes you might need some help on the financial side.
Yeah.
But yeah, most farms don't. It's just a size thing, I think, is why people don't have them more than
And that
anything
was a bit
else.
of a loaded question, but I think the flip side of that coin is if every farm could afford it, what percent would have it? And I think it would be a massive amount. And what that tells me is the value that there is in better understanding the business side. People maybe know that they need better numbers or need better understanding. I think repeatability is a huge thing of how do you make sure that the processes and procedures that you're doing in your accounting, in your recording, in your projections for your year end are repeatable processes. And that's where the CFO would fill that role. But what ends up happening as farmers is, you end up just doing all of it and you maybe are doing six things 40% as well as you should be. It's all getting done, but what's at stake there? And that's where I really do think that there's a massive amount of importance with having an advisor, or having, if you can't afford a CFO as most farms can't, who is on your team that can provide those services and provide that value. And I would also tell you too that the number of clients that we sit down with AgView Solutions on the consulting side that are at the point in their business where they know they're missing something, but they don't know what it is. Probably 60% of the time it's a CFO or it's someone that can take, maybe they have their basic accounting down, but they want better numbers. They want better projections. They need to have someone analyze that information. And I'm guessing you see a lot of the same thing as well with the people you work with.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I even think some of it, not that it's so right, but I think historically lenders kind of would fill the gap of some of that and like has changed things changed with them. They really probably shouldn't be giving people opinions on management advice. But I think historically they did. And I think in any accounting firm too. I mean, it's a struggle for people to find, accountants that understand ag. And I think, 20 years ago, you might have been able to find somebody who also would be able to do some of these other kind of CFO like things at an accounting firm, but just finding people that have that kind of at your accounting. But anybody working at an accounting firm is a struggle, and then finding the ag side's made it harder. So there's that more of a niche where it's kind of back to you need to do it for yourself on your own farm. Because like I said, it's so important, especially now as tight as things are with margins and stuff. Just sitting down once a year and doing your cash flow and hoping that it's right. And then, doing that today and then turning around trying to sell corn in June based on your numbers that you put together in January. It's like, yeah, that probably isn't going to work, or it will work, but you just don't know where you're at until the end of the year. And you're just always behind trying to make decisions.
And I just wrote an article on that was titled, 2024 is a train wreck in slow motion. We saw the 2023 ending balance sheets that people had corn priced at 525, 550, or they didn't have it priced, but they had it annotated on their balance sheet as that. And, corn dropped down to 380 by June, or, June, July, August, September of 2024. And now you have people thinking we just had $500,000 of working capital wiped out. If they chose to or were forced to sell their product as a result of cash flow needs, or they needed the bin storage space. So I think that's a very relevant recent history example. And I think your point there with the thin margins is a great segue into the next question that I was going to ask. And, how does the CFO make or save farms money? How do you think about that from not only like a consultant advisor standpoint, but just objectively, how should farms think of, okay, if I bring a CFO into my operation, how do I justify it? Because we do work with operations that are at the point where they need to hire, but they're really struggling with trying to bring someone in full time or to pay for those services.
Yeah. I mean, some of it's, again, it depends on your farm operation. I've seen to the point where you get to that point and you get like even looking at your bills, sometimes some of it's just looking at stuff and analyzing it. I mean, an example I can give from history I've seen is like, somebody go through and say, okay, you think your input bills ought to be about this much. When you get the actual bills, they are way over. And it's like, yeah, maybe we all decided we were wrong, or maybe there's a billing issue that, when you get to the point where you're buying a tremendous amount of fertilizer and you have all these invoices, most farms don't have if something came into a warehouse, there's usually a piece of paper and it shows up at the warehouse and they hand it to the accounts receivable person and there's some pattern. Well, most farms just get a big packet at the end of the month. It's like, yeah, I think that's about right.
Uh,
So some of it's just helping, in an office, tracking some of that stuff down. Then I think some of it is just simply, if you're smaller than that, it's just, when you put a budget together to be able to look at things, I think, forward and backwards, like your example there with the grain, if you were sitting down quarterly or a couple times a year, just looking at an accrual financials, and again, doing an accrual financial in June for a farm, it's harder to do, but something like this huge thing with the grain being sold for less than what it was, you could have had that number figured out after the grain was sold and sat down with the banker in June and said, hey, this is coming and it's not good. And basically how much over time too, I think a lot of it's the stress of, from June on to the rest of the year, how much were you thinking about that, but you really didn't know exactly what it was. And once you figure out what the problem is, like you got to identify it first and you figure out how to solve it. So I think there's a lot just to me, it's in the decision making. It's be able to have the information you need to make decisions as fast as you need to be able to do that. I think that's a lot of value that a CFO brings. I mean, there can be some specific ones you're saving this or that, but I think it's that. Then I think it's just a relationship with your banker and your accountant. Like if everything is ready and everything makes sense, I think it's a lot easier, for you to be able to get your loans approved. And then also, flip side of that is there's an opportunity to grow. I think when you have all your ducks in a row, the bank's like, okay, we can, if you think that'll work, we trust you, you can make it work. And I think you get some opportunities that you otherwise wouldn't. And, I do think there's a difference in interest rates. I mean, there's a little bit of that too. If you show up with really good information, you might get a little bit less interest rate. And if you're borrowing enough money, that can add up and pay for a chunk of somebody's cost as well.
I'm going to add one more that you didn't list out there, and that's sleeping really good at night and having peace of mind. Uh,
Yeah.
that's hard to put a price on, but I think, you do get. I think regardless of operational size, really is what do people stress about, and a lot of times it's the stress of the unknown. And if you're running a business
Yeah.
and you don't know your numbers and you don't feel comfortable with where you're at financially or just don't understand it, what's the value in having, an advisor, someone on your team that really understands that, can give you those numbers, give you those projections. And that's that's a price that's hard to quantify and a value that's hard to quantify, but that's what we really see with a lot of folks when they get to that point of just saying, I can't do this anymore. I can't handle it on my own. And maybe I need to bring someone in as a part-time CFO to really help our operation. And I know it's a big need out there. When do you think objectively that farms should really start to consider having a part-time CFO or having an advisor as part of their decision? Is it an acre? Is it a dollar amount? Is it some combination? Or how should they think about that?
Yeah, I mean, some of it's dependent on, I think, your what you're talented at too. If you're like, if you used to be a loan officer, then okay, maybe it's not as big of a deal. The acreage, I don't know if it's exact acreage. To me, a lot of it's also, I mean, as you get bigger, where to me, the biggest thing I see is as you get multiple family members like in the operation making decisions, like past the husband and wife stage. And even that maybe sometimes, but especially if you get like there's two or three people with multiple generations. And like, if we have one example, we got one operating entity with several different individuals owning it. And then we've got a trucking side business and we got a seed side business and all that.
Hmm.
It's like sometimes you just need somebody objectively to sit down and say, okay, here's what everything looked like last year. And, and making sure that, you know, when you have different entities, there's a lot of stuff going back and forth. So you've got to kind of make sure all that stuff makes sense and is fair. So to me, when you grow to that point, I think that's definitely in a situation where, yeah, you just, and a lot of times, it's just beyond what typically a person paying the bills, the amount of time you have allocated for somebody doing that. It's like once you get past maybe one or two entities and it's like, okay, we can just pay the bills and do one balance sheet. Once you get past that, I think you really need somebody to help you come in with that.
Yeah.
And
That
just, and two, I mean, I think, go ahead.
No, that's a great answer. I think it is a little bit more complex than how I intentionally laid it out there. So, you know, that's a great way to lay it out.
And I will say too, I mean, I know people who have, just farm. It's just, they're like I'm gonna say the one man show, but a little bit like they do everything. They may not farm that much, but they haul their grain, just spray everything themselves, and they like, and maybe have livestock on the side. Like they don't ever have time to be in the office, and they never are.
Hmm.
I'm like, okay, that's somebody where it's like, I mean, I've had people who are like, please help me, part of my CFO, please help me set my computer up so I can pay my bills. Like I've done that for people before. It's just, okay,
Yeah.
to make it as easy as you can because their goal is, and they've got a business that I need to be outside working all the time. And I need to spend as little time in the office as possible. And it's like, okay, I can maybe get my bills paid, but then everything else, because I've got people who, I mean, the banker calls me when they want the information first, and then I call the farmer.
Yeah.
I may already actually have it, but I say, okay, can I send this to Bob today? And like, sure. So, it's saving them some time too. And it's at some level, it's like, instead of having somebody help you out on the farm, do some work, you have somebody in the office helping you out.
And
And there's some of that as well.
and if you enjoy doing you divided it into business, ag, and equipment, if you like doing the agriculture, the outside agronomy piece of it, or operating machinery, why hire someone else to do the stuff you like doing if there's someone that's much
Hi.
better than you at the stuff that you don't like doing? And I think there's a lot to be said about that too, is if we're transparent and honest with ourselves, there's things that we're just not good at. I'm the exact same as you, Paul. If it comes to breaking something, I'm pretty good at breaking stuff, but when it comes to fixing stuff, I'm really not that good at it. And that's why I like working with, you know, the mechanics and the people that we have locally, because I understand that my asset is in managing the agronomic side and in managing the business side. Mechanic side, I'll let someone that's more talented and gifted do that. That's huge.
Mhm. Yep.
One thing that I wanted to hit on here, the last couple of questions I had for you is, are there a lot of, it seems to me that there's not a lot of like, for hire or part-time CFO services out there. And I think it's a huge asset to farm operations. Is that a proper perception, or am I just oblivious to, some of the services that are out there?
Yeah, no, I don't think there's a lot of people that do it. I mean, I think there is some that, at the accounting firm level that sometimes people are kind of doing it on the side,
Mhm.
that they have somebody who they trust and do it. But yeah, there are not very many just flat out CFO, part-time CFO stuff out there.
Yeah, and then I think another important question to ask is we always tell people on the consulting side is here's what we do, and here's what we don't do. There are things that we don't do as part of transition planning, business structuring, cost of production analysis, and usually it comes down to there's a lot of things that we don't physically do for people. They're the ones that do that. We talk on the bigger picture, the implementation, here's the plan, here's the, communication that we should have. Is there anything that you or not make sure, but is there anything that you don't do as a part-time CFO service that people ask you that you're like, that's just not part of, what an advisor like that should do in your role?
Yeah, one thing is I don't get into the tax preparation at all. I kind of used to do that previous thing, but just kind of what I'm doing, I really enjoy the CFO part more, and then it's kind of the way to set up. Don't do that. And then the thing I've kind of is over time, like the bookkeeping piece and the part-time CFO or CFO usually that doesn't work. I've kind of tried it, and basically what it is, I mean, I'm remote, so most clients I don't get to their farms. I may go for once or twice a year for a meeting, but like the bookkeeping, dealing with the mail, the bills are coming in. It's like really for that to work right, you really got to have somebody there in the office that's really good at it and it's getting all that stuff done.
Yeah.
Like I said, if they have questions, sure, you can help somebody figure it out, but that bookkeeping piece it's almost like you got to have a way to and that's too, I see that where the value of the part-time CFO, if you're really struggling to pay your bills and just getting stuff done, I don't know if having a part-time CFO come in really helps because when you get into accrual financial statements, an example I give people is have people before were like, at the end of the year, you got to sit down and you're doing that balance sheet, like what's your accounts receivables and accounts payables, and that has to be a really good number
Hmm.
and it has to be consistent from year to year to year. And if you're struggling to get to that point, it's like, well, you're probably better off to spend money on that and getting that fixed before you look for somebody to help you. Because so much of like what a CFO will do for you is they're going to look at how those accounts receivable and accounts payable change from year to year
Hmm.
and what trends that is. And if you're all over the board with what your those bills are, or something like example I give is, and I know people who work on machinery and get their combine fixed, and back and forth. Some years they're paying in January, they're paying for last crop year's combine repair, and then I know some people who in January are paying for the one for the next year. It's
Yeah.
like, well, you've got to get some details like that figured out because that kind of stuff messes your accruals up completely.
Yeah.
So that's
Absolutely.
a part of it I've seen where like to get to the part-time CFO and get that data we're talking about, you got to have, a really good set of cash books. It's not the accrual adjustment, it's just the cash side and where we're at.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great place to kind of work to wrap this up here. And Paul, I think there's a lot of people that would really benefit from a part-time CFO. That's why I wanted to have this conversation because, Chris and Andy and Joe and I, we work with these operations that have a lot of the bookkeeping in place, and maybe they're growing their business, or maybe they're at a point where they have, like you said, two, three generations involved or multiple owners within an entity, and they just need that level of professionalism. And they might not be at a point where they can bring in a full-time CFO. And I think the services that you and others offer is something very valuable. So I think listeners will get a lot out of this. You do have a website, bergschneiderag.com. Is there any other good resources or places that people should check out what you offer, Paul?
Yeah, no, like that's a good place. And I mean, I think my email is on there too. It's just paul@bergschneiderag.com. So they're welcome to email me with any questions. And
Perfect.
yeah. As far as resources, I tell people, I mean, anything you write that David Cole has written, read it.
Yeah.
Because and him and Danny Kleinfelter, those are the godfathers of, trying to sit in that place where you're combining, the farming side and the business side together. And that's the stuff you need to look at. So
So with the work that you do, I'll leave you with this, Paul. Is there any recommendations or just thoughts that you have on your mind as we head into 2025 here? Something, a key takeaway that operations should be thinking about as we move into the new year?
Yeah, no, I think it's, it kind of comes back to what we were talking about at the beginning. It's the working capital side. I mean, we talked about a lot of what can happen in the past. At this point, it is what it is. I think the biggest thing for a person to figure out is where are you at working capital wise? What's your next year going to look at? And then, I always go the next step is, well, what's it going to look like a year from today?
Mm.
And then I think that kind of helps you figure out like, okay, if we're in an okay position, 2025, we're not going to make any money. Maybe we lose a little bit, but we have enough working capital at the end of next year. Our ratios look okay. Then, you can just kind of plug your way through it. Um, but if your working capital is not great and you look at next year and like, oh, wow, it's going to get a lot worse by the end of next year. Yeah, don't wait till the end of next year to talk about that. That's something where you got to sit with your banker and maybe you got to restructure your loans or do something different now. But, because you know, we could have a great, you sit here today and sometimes when cash flows don't look so great, I've been doing this long enough where sometimes they don't look great and the year ends up fine. And then sometimes there's years they look pretty good and like, oh, at the end of the year, it doesn't work out. So you just want to make sure that, if it doesn't look great, you want to stay on top with your banker and figure out what you can do to make it better. So, the goal is to make the family farm survive way past this one cycle. And you got to look with that long term in mind as you're looking at it.
Yeah, that's great advice, Paul. Well, thank you so much for the time. And, for those of you listening, if you think you may need a part-time CFO as part of your farm operation, I encourage you to give Paul a call and see if that's a good fit for you. But Paul, stay warm out there, and we'll just plan to be in touch.
Yep. Sounds good. Thank you, Shay.
And thank you everyone for listening to another episode of the AgView Pitch. We will catch you next time.